and welcome to Pathfinding. So it's been a while since I've done a video. Actually, I've been busy working on my book, my children's book, which I've just published. You can find this on Amazon. And it's basically a middle grade children's fairy tale. And it's all book series, so there'll be 2 more books coming out this year. So yeah, that's why I haven't done a pathfinding video for quite a while, but I've got a lot more to do, and now the book's out, I can focus on the videos. So the first video that I'm going to be talking about today is, let me just go to this screen, it's called 4 Assessments of Life and Death. And before I talk about the assessments of life and death, I want to talk about the concept of life and death to begin with. So we tend to think of life and death as being, I'm alive, and then if I die, then I'm dead. Or animals being alive or dead, or even plants. But there's a deeper meaning to the concept of life and death than just something being physically functional or not. For example, you can think of if somebody goes to a party and there's not much happening and it's pretty low-key, people might say, oh, this scene is really dead. Or people in a relationship, maybe gets on the rocks and they really feel like there's no life left in the relationship, so they might describe the relationship as being dead, even before the couple break up. And so sometimes you might describe your person as full of life. Well, we don't really describe a person as being dead when they're alive, but in general, the idea of life is something with vitality and something that's also growing or going in the right direction. It's alive. And so that's how we're going to be talking about life and death today, not just necessarily just life and death. So with that, here's the title, 4 Assessments of Life and Death. And here are the assessments. So the first one is, this is my phrasing, the sentence is a little bit clumsy, but I feel like it describes it well. It's life which feels like life. And then the second one is life which feels like death. Third one is death which feels like death. The fourth one is death which feels like life. So let's start with the first one, life which feels like life. When I say feels like, we are evolved to have a strong sense of something that's good or bad, something that's dangerous or not, or destructive or not. We have it in anxiety, we have it in whether we feel pain or pleasure or not, or whether we're evolved to feel fear from certain things that are dangerous. Like if you climbing up a rock face for fun and you get a little bit too high, you start to feel like, hang on, a tree or a rock face, this is getting really dangerous. It's just innate in us. We generally know which direction will help us continue to stay alive and also go towards life. So an example of life which feels like life could be something like you've been out working hard all day and you're feeling a little bit hungry and even tired, and then you come home and you make a delicious, really nutritious meal. And when you eat that food, you don't feel like you're sacrificing or suffering for the benefit it's going to give you. You actually love it and you enjoy it, even the smell of it, even the thought of before you have the food. You actually love it. And you can do something which you love and gives you complete pleasure and joy. And it's completely good for you. As long as it's nutritious food in the right proportion and the right timing of day, perhaps you could say, then eating that food is a completely good thing. And it feels good. So as you eat it, you feel yourself coming back to life. You're getting energy and you're getting pleasure and you're getting hope. And it's something which is completely good for you. And another example of something which is life, which feels like life, is you may have a relationship. It could be a friendship or it could be a romantic relationship. And when you engage in that relationship, there's bonding and interaction. And you feel so alive with that person and you feel joy. And it indeed creates a bond. And so it creates a sense of life. Or you may engage in a business or any hobby activity which is really productive that you really, really enjoy. And it produces something that's wonderful and good and enhances life. And so we do tend to sometimes think of things Or if you enjoy it, it must be bad for you. Or if it's uncomfortable, it must be doing you some good. But actually, that's only in emergency time. So that's why the second category is life which feels like death. An example of that might be if you're overweight and you finally decide this is really getting unhealthy, I can feel it's unhealthy and I need to diet. And every time you deny yourself that food, and I've put on some weight, so I've experienced it. Every time you deny yourself that food, when you've got that habit of eating too much or the wrong kind, or even at the wrong time of day, every time you deny yourself that food, you feel miserable and you feel like you've lost something which is going to enhance you, and you feel like it's a little step towards death because it's suffering and it's sacrifice. But actually, it's leading towards life. It's good for you. Or there might be a situation where you like studying. And so when you do study, that's the first category, life, which feels like life, because you enjoy the studying and it's good for you. It's enhancing you, giving you more life. But if you've neglected your studying and an exam is coming up and you've got a cram and you've got to really study like 12 hours a day intensively for the next week, otherwise you know you're going to fail the exam, then it's miserable, the stress of it and the anxiety of it and the way you just feel mental anguish and pain. So that's something which, because you've left it too late, but it's necessary. And in doing it, you really catch up with your studies, you pass your exam, you enhance your life, you can get a better job, get a better life. So it's life, but in doing that, it feels like death. And another example could be if you're really unfit and you haven't exercised for a long time and you finally decide, oh, my body's starting to ache, maybe I'm 40 years old or something, and you're not at the age where you can just be lazy when you're young and still be fit. And so in order to get back to health and be strong and actually probably live longer, you go out and start exercising. And when you do, it is painful and miserable. I remember when I had like serious back pain and somebody suggested I take up swimming. I ended up swimming every day, 40 laps for years and years to cure it. But when I first went swimming, the first couple of laps, that's all I could do in an hour, 2 or 3 laps maybe. And I would have to get out of the pool and I would be shaking and I'd feel like I'm about to faint or drop dead because of the exertion and sit on a pool chair. But within a few months I was swimming, 40 laps and it wasn't even tired afterwards. So there are certain things which is life which feels like death. I guess the most extreme one would be if somebody addicted to drugs wants to give up the drugs. I suppose it could be the same with smoking or alcohol or lesser drugs, but somebody addicted to serious drugs. We've all seen the movies. They go through cold turkey and it's the most miserable thing. In fact, it's so painful and miserable that a lot of them just can't go through it and so they go back onto the drugs. But what they're actually doing, what they're actually suffering is they're taking themselves back from death towards life. And they're going to be healthy and they're going to be really fit again and they're going to see the world differently. And so they're going to come back like zombies, coming back to life. But it doesn't feel like that when they're doing it. It feels like death. It feels like they're hurting themselves because it's painful. And so that's an example of life which feels like death. So the first two, life which feels like life and life which feels like death, they're both, you could say, the good ones. One of them feels like what it is, and the other one, it feels like the opposite of what it is. Our ideal state in life, as much as possible, is to be in the first one, life which feels like life. The third in the category, which although is bad in all ways, is good in that it's sort of honest, and that is death which feels like death. And an example of this is something that we experience all the time, is pain. When you feel physical pain, it's usually because you're being damaged or you're about to be damaged. When you cut yourself or when something's too hot or there's too much pressure on your bones and it feels painful. So that's like an alarm bell saying that, in my other talk, I talk about how we go from, instead of just dying when we do something detrimental to ourselves, we're able to sustain damage, excuse me, and instead of having to sustain damage, we are able to feel pain, which is a kind of like a virtual damage. Or even before we feel pain, we're able to feel anxiety, which means it's like a premonition of we're going to suffer pain in a moment and damage. And so death, which feels like death, is some behavior that you might do which feels bad. And it is bad for you. It doesn't need to be also physical. It could be immoral behavior. It could be your conscience hurting you when you do something wrong, stealing or cheating on a partner or betraying a friend or just lying. So death, which feels like death, is something which is bad for you and harmful and takes you away from vitality and life and towards death. Could be death of a relationship, could be death of your integrity, could be death of your body. It takes you in that direction, and all the alarms are kicking off. It feels like you're going in that direction. And then the fourth one, which is the worst one, because it's not only something that is negative that you don't want, which is going towards death or something detrimental for you, but it's also deceptive. It's death which feels like life. And my biggest difficulty with this one is that I'm not really a drinker, don't smoke, never took drugs, but I'm addicted to sweets. And that's why I've got a bit of a belly. I'm addicted to sweets, and I can't moderate sweets. It's a real addiction. So if I even eat some, I just want more and more and more. So the only way I can really overcome that addiction is abstain completely, just eat healthy food. And so death, which feels like death, is some behavior or activity or even way of thinking which is detrimental to you. It's detrimental to you or your relationships or your projects. And ultimately, it could actually lead to death. And so obviously the biggest example would be people who take drugs. When they take drugs, they feel amazingly fantastic. I assume, A, because they keep doing it, and B, because they do it despite all the detrimental effects to their life. So when people take drugs, especially hard drugs, heroin, crack, cocaine, those kind of things, they feel amazing. They feel more alive than they've ever felt in their life. But that's a massive deception, because actually what they're actually doing is killing themselves little by little. And even if somebody could take drugs all their life and live to a ripe old age, we know what hard drug addicts are like, what state they're in. They become degraded, and they even look ghoulish, and their whole body looks kind of almost like a zombie. And it destroys their career, it destroys their relationships, it destroys their self-esteem even. And that's why sometimes they use weird euphemisms for drugs, like sometimes they call it medicine. And that's because it doesn't make them better, but it makes their life increasingly, incrementally, continually worse. But in the short moment when they take it, when they feel high, they feel alive again. It's a deception. They're not actually alive at all. It's just a deceptive feeling. And so there's all sorts of behaviors that we can engage in which enslave us or hurt us or destroy the things around us. Gambling is another one. I suppose gamblers feel excited in that moment. They feel so alive when they're on the edge of danger, of losing money or gaining money. And gamblers, especially those that are really addicted to gambling, they destroy their whole financial foundation and sometimes their family. And people who betray friends, they end up alone with no friends. People who betray relationships in their family, they end up with no family. They just literally destroy their family. It no longer exists. And so, death which feels like death. There are so many ways, and I'm sure they don't always have to be super dramatic, like a divorce or drug addiction. It could be in the small things. It is anything which actually feels good, and that's our temptation to do it. But actually, we know it's hurting us. It's taking us towards the negative, not the positive. And so these are the four categories. Let me just jump. Yeah. So these are I call it four assessments of life and death. It's like four ways of looking at things which either lead to life or lead to death. So let me just go through them one last time just to finish off. So there's life, which feels like life. Life, which feels like death. death which feels like life, and death which feels like death. So whenever we assess our lifestyle or our way of thinking or our way of treating other people or just our general way of living, we want to do things which enhance us and enhance those around us and those projects that we're working on and create something beautiful and always on the growth and always growing and on the increase and creating something which is beneficial to others and to ourselves and which inspires us, which makes us feel alive and which makes us feel valuable, that our contribution is valuable, what we've created is valuable. So if we live in an optimal way, then ideally, a lot of the things we do, we can actually enjoy. When I first started exercising, it was just painful. That was life, which feels like death. But after a certain amount of time exercising, you no longer have to suffer horribly. There might be a little bit of stress, but you even reach the point where you enjoy exercising. When people are studying, as long as they do it in a timely fashion, they can get joy and a good feeling while they study. Again, life which feels like life. Even when you sleep, when you reach the end of the day, you've been working hard and you're very tired, you have a shower, you get into bed, you close your eyes in a soft, warm, comfortable bed, and that feeling of going to sleep, being asleep, and even when you wake up is a wonderful feeling, and it's recreational. It recreates you. It makes you feel healthier and stronger and more alive. So there are lots of examples in life where if we live a balanced life of wisdom, we can experience things that are good for us, that make us feel alive and make us actually alive and enhance us. But sometimes there are situations, whether we get sick and we need to have an operation or take bitter medicine, or we need to, whether there's a ecological disaster or a harsh winter and farmers need to really work a lot harder. There's sometimes a situation where it gets to the edge and we have to do things which are actually painful and uncomfortable, put ourselves through those things, but knowing that the result is going to be good for us and we're going to be more alive because of it. And that's life which feels like death. And finally, well, not finally, penultimately, there's death which feels like death, which is the things which either happen to us or we do, and they feel horrible, and we just know to the core of our being that this is not good for us. It feels not good, and it is not good. So at least there's an honesty about it. And then the most dangerous one is death, which feels like life, which is anything we do or anything that happens to us, which we're somehow tricked into feeling like it's really great for us, it's really good for us, but actually it's hurting us. Sometimes we know that, sometimes we don't know that. So these are what I call the 4 assessments of life and death, and they're really part of a larger talk about life and death, which I'll be going into in full later. This is really what I call season 0 of Pathfinding. So I'm speaking more extemporaneously. I don't really have any notes apart from a few prompts. But as I go through all these talks, I think I have about 100 talks to give. As I go through all these talks, I will prepare presentations for them and notes more, so they'll be more structured. But I find that when I use notes, I come across more wooden and not so eloquent. Not that I'm that eloquent now, but I feel I've been thinking about these things for so many years, decades even, so I can speak off the cuff a little bit better. So I hope you enjoyed that talk, and I'll be doing more of them. I took a break, as I said. Let me just plug this, sponsored by, to publish my book, A Rainbow Over Cuckoo Village. It's a traditional family-style fairy tale for 8 to 12-year-olds. You can find it on Amazon. And yeah, as I say, I've got about 100 more talks, and some of them are theology-based and some of them are more science-based. So the whole concept of pathfinding is to reconcile science and theology, because the idea is that both of them are expressions of the same core principles. And so I'll be talking about sometimes overtly biblical, theological things, and sometimes not at all. I think the next talk is going to be, it's going to be about, well, it's a sister talk to this talk, I would say. It's going to be about pleasure and pain, 2 different types of pleasure and pain. So again, there's 4 categories. So maybe in about a week, I think that talk will be out. All right, thank you for watching, and see you at the next Pathfinding talk.